In this episode of Inside Criminology, we follow the timeline of criminal behavior from first steps to life-altering turning points. Chapter 9 of Larry J. Siegel's Criminology brings us into the developmental perspective, where crime is not just a decision, but a journey shaped by personality, opportunity, and life's unpredictable turns.
That's right. And it's a shift in focus, really. Most theories ask, why commit crime? But developmental theories ask something bigger.
Like, how does the whole career of crime play out?
Exactly. How does it actually unfold over a person's life?
Okay. So not just the why of the first offense, but the whole sequence. Like, when does it typically kick off?
Yeah.
And why do some people seem stuck in it for ages while others just stop?
Right. And why the changes. Escalation to more serious stuff for some, de-escalation for others, and then there are those who seem to completely turn things around.
It sounds like a much broader view, looking at onset, continuation, termination, considering personal stuff, social connections, just life happening, right?
Yeah.
Opportunity situations.
Precisely. It's a global vision. It sees crime not as this static thing, but as dynamic. It changes.
Okay, so in this deep dive, we're seeing sort of two main branches, two big ways of thinking about this journey.
That's it. First, there's the life course view. This one argues that your, let's say, propensity for crime isn't fixed. It's actually quite fluid.
Fluid, how so?
It changes over your life, and it's heavily influenced by your relationships, your experiences, stuff starting way back in childhood.
Okay, so life events matter. What's the other view?
That's the latent trait view. It proposes something quite different. There's some kind of underlying, stable, personal quality.
Stable, like it doesn't change.
Pretty much. It's thought to be there early on and basically predisposes someone towards crime throughout life, even if the amount of crime they commit goes up or down based on opportunity.
Interesting contrast. Okay, let's dive in. Let's unpack that life course view first. What's the absolute core idea here?
The core idea is it's that a person's tendency towards crime isn't set in stone. It shifts. It changes as you age.
And relationships and experiences are key drivers of that shift.
Hugely important from early childhood onwards. And crime itself isn't constant either. It varies. Severity, how often, the types of crime committed, it all changes.
And you mentioned it's interactional. What does that mean exactly?
It means it's like a two-way street. Your behavior affects your life circumstances and relationships, and those circumstances and relationships then influence your future behavior. It's a continuous loop.
A feedback loop. Makes sense.
Yeah, and a big part of this perspective is looking at life transitions. The big milestones we all tend to go through.
Like starting school, getting a job, marriage, kids, those things.
Exactly. Those are the expected markers. But when those transitions get disrupted, maybe you drop out, can't find work, have a messy divorce.
That's where the trouble can really take hold or get worse.
That's often the case, especially if someone's already facing difficulties like poverty or family dysfunction. The material really emphasizes that these disruptions, and crucially, the cumulative impact of multiple disruptions piling up over time, that can really sustain a criminal path.
Like digging yourself into a deeper hole, maybe?
Sort of. It's harder to get back on a conventional track if the supports keep falling away.
And it makes sense that what influences you changes as you age. Family's huge when you're little, but less so when you're a teenager, maybe.
Right. Early life, family is paramount. Adolescence. School and peers become dominant influences. Then in adulthood, things like your job, your marriage, or partnerships, they become really significant.
And this offers a bit of hope, doesn't it? Positive experiences later on can actually help someone desist.
Absolutely. A stable job, a supportive partner. These can be powerful turning points, helping people move away from crime. But conversely, negative experiences can pull them back in.
So it's definitely not just one thing causing crime. It's this complex weave. Personality, education, family.
It's multidimensional, yeah. And they point out that crime often seems to run in families, which reinforces this idea of a complex interplay of factors, not just, a simple crime gene or something.
There's some foundational research mentioned here. The Glukes, from way back.
Yes, Sheldon and Eleanor Gluck. Their work in the 1930s was really pioneering, groundbreaking longitudinal studies. They followed young delinquents over many years.
And what was their big finding?
They really hammered home the importance of early onset. Starting delinquency young was a huge predictor of continuing into an adult criminal career.
So trouble starting early. A major red flag for later life.
A very strong one. They had that phrase, something like, the deeper the roots of childhood maladjustment, the smaller the chance of adult adjustment. They saw real stability in offending for those early starters.
Did they only look at social stuff?
No, that's what was interesting. They included biological and psychological traits too. Intelligence, mental health, even body type, and linked those to persistence.
And this work was ignored for a while.
Yeah, kind of pushed aside by mainstream criminology at the time. It was only rediscovered decades later when these developmental ideas started gaining traction again. Fascinating, really.
It seems like researchers like Lauber and LeBlanc later really picked up that baton, asking those core questions.
Exactly. Why start? Why stop? Why get worse or better? Why stick to one type of crime or do lots of different things? They really pushed to understand the process.
And that led to ideas like problem behavior syndrome or PBS.
Yes, PBS. This is a really important insight. The idea is that for many kids at risk, crime isn't just this isolated thing they do.
It's part of a bigger cluster of issues.
Precisely. It's often one symptom among many interconnected social problems. You see gang involvement, maybe substance abuse, school problems, family dysfunction, fighting, maybe even early gambling. It all tends to cluster together.
So tackling just the crime might not be enough if all these other things are still going on.
That's the implication. People with one symptom often have many others. And the cumulative effect can be really damaging. The source material even notes higher mortality rates for youth caught up in this syndrome.
Wow. And building on this, Rolf Lieber identified different pathways to crime.
Yeah, based on his longitudinal work with Pittsburgh youth, he saw distinct paths, often starting pretty early.
Okay, what were they?
There's the authority conflict pathway. Starts really young, maybe stubbornness, then defiance, then actively avoiding authority, think truancy, running away.
Okay, that's why.
Then the covert pathway. This is more underhanded stuff. Starts small, like lying or shoplifting, then maybe property damage, and can escalate to more serious theft, fraud, burglary, sneaky stuff.
Got it. And the third?
The overt pathway. This one involves aggression. Starts with minor aggression, maybe bullying, then physical fighting, and potentially leads to serious violence.
And someone could be on more than one path.
Yeah, absolutely. And Lober's research suggests those folks, the ones on multiple pathways, they're the most likely to become persistent, chronic offenders.
Which links back to that age of onset idea from the Gloops, right? Starting early down these paths is a bad sign for the future.
Exactly. It strongly predicts a longer, more frequent, more varied criminal career. Early behaviors like truancy, cruelty, lying, theft, heavy drinking or drug use, even by age 10, those are flagged as early markers.
And these early starters tend to have rougher adult lives.
Research consistently shows that, yeah, less emotional support, lower job satisfaction, more problems generally compared to those who don't offend or who start later and stop. But, and this is really important, not everyone who starts early keeps going.
Ah, right. Which brings us to the flip side. Desisting from crime, people stopping. How does that happen?
Well, Shad Maruna's work, especially his book, Making Good, is key here. He argues desistance isn't just like flipping a switch, it's a process, often a long-term cognitive one.
Cognitive, like changing how you think.
Exactly. It's about fundamentally changing how you see yourself, creating a new identity.
So more than just quitting the behavior, it's becoming a different person in a way.
That's a good way to put it. Seeing yourself as this new person, understanding your past actions, finding real satisfaction in doing productive, non-criminal things, feeling like you have control over your future, having a sense of purpose.
And Maruna found they even reframed their past.
Yeah, often seeing their criminal history not just as bad, but as a learning experience, finding a silver lining that helps shape their new non-criminal identity. It's quite profound.
And others, Giordano and her colleagues, talked about scaffolding for these changes, environmental help.
Right. They talk about needing cognitive transformations, but these are often helped along by environmental changes or supports, what they call scaffolding. People need hooks for change.
Hooks for change? Like what?
Positive life experiences. Maybe finding a really supportive spouse, getting a meaningful job, something that provides a positive anchor and a new direction.
And you have to consciously reject the old life.
Yes, you have to define that new situation as incompatible with deviance. You have to actively envision and then kind of build this appealing and conventional replacement self. The thinking becomes, someone like me, the person I am now, just wouldn't do that anymore.
So the old lifestyle loses its appeal entirely.
It's no longer seen as positive or even viable. Interestingly, the research notes some gender differences in these hooks. Men might point to something like prison, forcing them to reflect.
Whereas for women,
Common hooks mentioned are things like religious conversion, having children, or finding a supportive romantic partner who boosts their self-esteem.
Though that point about women maybe adopting very traditional roles as part of desistance, that's something to think about, isn't it? Could it limit them in other ways?
It's a really valid, critical question raised in the material. Does this replacement self, while helping stop crime, potentially restrict autonomy or economic independence? It's complex.
And just to confirm, the general pattern of early problems predicting later difficulties, substance abuse, mental health, relationships that holds for both men and women.
Yes, the research indicates those connections are there for both genders.
Okay, another important distinction mentioned is Terry Moffat's idea of adolescent-limited versus life course persisters.
Right, this is a really influential typology. Moffat argued most kids who get into trouble are adolescent-limited.
Meaning their offending is mostly confined to their teenage years.
Exactly. It starts and peaks in adolescence.
Yeah.
Usually minor stuff, rebellion, maybe copying slightly more troubled peers, and then it significantly drops off as they hit adulthood, usually around 18 or so. It's often linked to social learning and the pains of growing up.
These are the typical teenagers getting into minor scrapes, but mostly growing out of it?
Largely, yes. But then there's the other group, the life course persisters.
And they're different how?
This is a much smaller group, but their pattern is distinct and, frankly, more concerning. They start offending very early, often before puberty. And they continue a pattern of serious, often versatile and violent crime right into adulthood.
What does Moffat suggest causes this pattern?
She points to a difficult combination, often starting very early, usually family dysfunction combined with neurological issues, maybe stemming from prenatal problems, low verbal skills, maybe ADHD, early aggression, or oppositional behavior.
So for this small group, it's potentially a combination of biological or neurological vulnerability and a tough environment right from the start.
That's the idea. The path often involves poor parenting, leading to early deviant behaviors, which then get reinforced through hanging out with similar delinquent peers. They tend to be more violent than their peers.
And punishment doesn't always work for them.
Moffat suggests punishment might just make them more cunning, better at avoiding getting caught rather than actually stopping the behavior. Research has generally supported this distinction. Early onset does predict more persistent, serious offending.
And that early onset seems more tied to individual traits, while the later adolescent-limited stuff is more about peers and temporary factors.
Yeah, that's what the evidence tends to show, yeah.
Okay, so we've seen individual patterns. How do theories try to integrate these life course ideas? The social development model.
Right, the SDM from Weiss, Catalano, and Hawkins. It tries to pull together ideas from social control theory, social learning, even structural factors.
How does it work?
Basically, it says community risk factors, like neighborhood disorganization, can weaken the social controls that normally keep people in line.
And then how you're socialized becomes key.
Exactly. Things like having opportunities for positive activities, being involved, getting reinforced for good behavior. Those are crucial. They really emphasize forming pro-social bonds, especially strong family attachments.
So strong family connections are protective.
Very much so. They tend to lead to better school engagement, academic success, and adopting conventional beliefs and activities. This model has directly informed interventions.
Like the Seattle Project mentioned.
The Seattle Social Development Project, yeah. A well-known program based on strengthening these family and school bonds, and it showed good results in reducing delinquency and substance use.
Let's hop across the pond. David Farrington's work in the UK, the ICAP theory from the Cambridge study. Similar findings.
Incredibly similar. His long-term study of London boys found the same patterns. A core group of chronic offenders, offending continuing over time, and that critical importance of early onset.
Did he paint a picture of the typical chronic offender?
He did, quite a detailed one. Usually male, starting with property crime, often from a low-income large family, maybe criminal parents or siblings, poor or harsh parenting, parental divorce, hanging with deviant friends, showing antisocial traits like dishonesty and aggression by age 8, doing poorly in school, often restless, impulsive, truant, and later having an unstable work history.
That's a lot of accumulated disadvantage. When did offending tend to peak and decline in his study?
Typically peaked mid to late teens, then declined in the 20s. Often, marrying a non-criminal spouse was linked to that decline.
Did he also find things that protected kids even if they were high risk?
Yes. Things like being shy or having few friends at age 8, coming from non-deviant families, or being highly regarded by their mothers seemed protective. And factors linked to actually desisting later included getting a stable job, marrying someone non-criminal, and moving away from old criminal contacts.
So even desisters might still struggle later on.
Yeah, the past can leave scars, debt, low pay, isolation. Farrington's theory, ICP, revolves around antisocial potential, or AP.
Antisocial potential.
It could be long-term, like underlying traits, or short-term, situational. He sees AP arising from an interaction between individual factors, impulsivity, reasoning skills, and external constraints like opportunities or monitoring.
And this AP interacts with?
What? With routine activities and short-term triggers being bored, angry, drunk, hanging with certain peers. That interaction is what leads to the decision to commit a crime. And the consequences then feedback and influence future AP. It's complex.
Okay, another interactional view. Terence Thornberry's Interactional Theory, also age-graded, emphasizes crime as interactive.
Fundamentally interactive, yes. He sees onset often linked to a witting social bond in adolescence. Less attachment to parents, school, conventional beliefs. Often tied to structural issues like living in disorganized areas.
And deviant peers reinforce this weakening bond.
They do. But Thornberry's key contribution is stressing the bidirectional causal influences. It's not just weak bonds, bad peers, crime. It's also crime weakens bonds, harder to reconnect, more crime.
Ah, so the act of committing crime actually damages the things that might pull you back.
Exactly. It becomes a self-perpetuating cycle that fuels a chronic career. Stressful life events work the same way, back and forth. Crime isn't just an outcome. It actively shapes your future path in relationships.
So it incorporates cognitive changes, too.
Yes, reasoning changes with age.
Yeah.
And research backs this up strongly. Delinquency impacts family life. Family life impacts delinquency. Early substance use predicts other risky behaviors. Deviant peers increase delinquency, but delinquency leads you to seek out those peers. It's a dynamic process.
Like a constant feedback loop.
Precisely. It shows crime is woven into the fabric of social life, influencing and being influenced by it. It really integrates a lot of different theoretical ideas.
And Robert Agnew's General Theory of Crime and Delinquency, GTCD, also hits this interactional theme.
Very much so. Agnew agrees crime is interactive. Environmental, social, personal traits predict crime. But crucially, crime itself shapes those traits and social factors.
The example being crime, parent problems, weaker bond, criminal friends, more crime.
That's the kind of loop he describes. He argues crime happens when constraints against it are low and motivations for it are high.
Constraints like?
Fear of punishment, having something to lose, stake in conformity, self-control.
And motivations like?
Beliefs that justify crime, hanging out with criminals, learning criminal techniques. These are shaped by 5 key life domains.
Okay, what are Agnew's 5 domains?
The self, traits like irritability, low self-control.
Right.
Family, parenting quality, marriage. School, negative experiences, poor education. Peers, delinquent friends. And work, unemployment, bad jobs.
And these domains all affect each other.
Absolutely. They're interdependent and they change over time. Bad parenting might be affected by a difficult child. One bad domain makes other bad domains worse. External factors like poverty or community issues and internal factors like genetics affect these domains. It's dynamic, complex, with influences happening right now and shaping long-term paths.
Okay, that's a really rich picture from the life course perspective. Lots of focus on change, interaction, pathways, turning points. Let's switch gears now to the latent trait view.
Yeah.
How does this differ fundamentally?
It's a pretty stark contrast. Where life course sees propensity changing, latent trait theories argue there's a stable, underlying personal characteristic, a latent trait that drives criminal inclination.
So something inside the person that's there early and just stays there.
That's the core idea. The trait itself is enduring. Any ups and downs in actual criminal behavior are seen as driven by external things, mostly changes in criminal opportunity.
So if someone has low self-control at 15, they still have it at 45, but maybe they have fewer opportunities for crime then.
Exactly. Or maybe aging reduces their physical ability for certain crimes. The opportunity changes. The trait doesn't.
This idea got a boost from Wilson and Herrnstein back in the 80s.
Yes. Their book, Crime and Human Nature, really pushed the importance of personal traits, genetics, IQ, personality, arguing they might be more critical than purely social factors.
They saw crime as a rational choice, but heavily influenced by these underlying traits.
Right. Weighing costs and benefits, but that calculation is shaped by biosocial and psychological factors. They pointed towards this stable, underlying, latent trait idea.
And the big theory here is Gottfredson and Hirschi's general theory of crime, GTC.
Definitely the most prominent one. It integrated a lot of different ideas: control, biosocial, rational choice, routine activities.
And their proposed latent trait is...
Low self-control. That's the master trait, according to GTC.
Okay, low self-control. But they make a distinction between the act and the offender.
Yes, very important. A criminal act, like burglary, is just an event, chosen for quick, easy gratification. The criminal offender is the person who has low self-control, making them prone to choosing such acts when opportunities arise.
So what does low self-control look like, according to them?
Impulsive, insensitive, physical rather than verbal, risk-taking, short-sighted, focused on the immediate moment, lacking diligence, adventurous, active, self-centered. They often have unstable relationships and see deviance as more exciting or fun, with less guilt.
And where does this low self-control come from?
GTC points squarely at early childhood parenting. Ineffective parenting, poor monitoring, not recognizing or correcting bad behavior, fails to instill self-control. They even suggest a biosocial link, that poor socialization might affect brain development.
And they see it as stable, fixed early on.
Yes, developed early and stable throughout life, which is why they famously question the need for a separate juvenile justice system. The underlying issue, low self-control, is the same.
They also make a really sweeping claim about what GTC explains, don't they?
They do. They claim it explains basically all crime and deviance. Street crime, white-collar crime, even things like drunk driving or workplace misconduct.
How does it explain white-collar crime if low self-control people are less likely to get those jobs?
They argue opportunity is key. While low self-control might make it harder to reach those positions, the temptations and opportunities in some white-collar settings can be so great that even people with relatively higher self-control might succumb. But generally, those with low self-control commit more crime across the board.
And the fact that crime rates drop with age isn't the trait changing, it's just fewer opportunities.
That's their argument. Opportunity changes, not the underlying propensity. People with low self-control still commit crime at higher rates than their peers at every age. And cross-cultural studies do show a link between low self-control and antisocial behavior.
So, thinking about GTC, it can explain why some impulsive people don't commit crime, maybe. No opportunities, or they find other risky outlets.
Yes, exactly. Or why someone usually quite controlled might snap under extreme pressure or temptation.
But it's faced its share of criticism, the tautology argument.
Right. Critics say it's circular, defining low self-control by the tendency to commit crime, then using low self-control to explain crime. G&H argue impulsivity is a broader trait about ignoring long-term consequences, which makes crime more likely, but isn't crime itself.
Other criticisms.
That it ignores different offender types, like Moffat's work suggests. That it downplays peer influence. G&H say impulsive kids just find each other, but research shows peers can be a dynamic influence, and that the link between self-control and crime, while real, isn't always that strong. Other factors matter too.
And what about research showing later life changes can reduce crime?
G&H would say those changes, marriage, job, mainly work by reducing opportunity or increasing social control, not by changing the stable, underlying low self-control.
Still, its strengths are its attempt to explain so much with one core concept and integrating different theoretical ideas.
Definitely influential. A couple of other latent trait theories worth mentioning briefly. Mark Colvin's differential coercion theory.
Coercion is the master trait here.
Yes. He argues that experiencing coercion, especially early punitive discipline, physical or psychological, shapes a person's worldview and behavior. This coercion can be direct from people or more impersonal, like economic pressure.
And different types of coercion have different effects.
Right. Low coercion is good. High but consistent coercion leads to anger and mental health issues. But high, inconsistent, erratic coercion, that's seen as the most damaging.
Why erratic?
Because it teaches you the world is unpredictable and you have no control. Colvin links this strongly to chronic predatory crime. These individuals often come from homes with erratic discipline.
And this can become a cycle. Coercion breeds coercion.
Exactly. It can be intergenerational. The person develops coercive ideation, seeing the world as hostile, believing you must use coercion to get by. Breaking that cycle is key.
And Colvin later added social support into the mix.
Yes. His DSSCT argues that consistent social support, emotional and practical, can counteract coercion's negative effects. Policy-wise, this means boosting support systems and reducing societal coercion.
Okay, one more. Charles Tittle's control balance theory. Control again, but a balance this time.
Yes. Tittle focuses on the ratio between the control you're subjected to and the control you can exercise. Balance equals conformity. Imbalance, either a deficit or a surplus, leads to deviance.
So a control deficit means you're controlled more than you control others. What does that lead to?
Things like predation, violence to take control, defiance, vandalism to assert yourself, or submission, passive rule following out of fear, trying to regain some control.
And a control surplus, having too much control.
That can lead to exploitation, using others, plunder, acting with impunity, or decadence, irrational acts of power like abuse, using or flaunting that excess control.
So the type of crime reflects the type of control imbalance.
That's the idea. The imbalance creates the potential, the situation provides the motivation and opportunity, and the act is an attempt to alter that control ratio. It integrates internal feelings of control with external constraints and opportunities.
Okay, so we have life course, change, interaction, turning points, and latent trait, stable predisposition, opportunity. Is there any common ground?
They both definitely see a criminal career as a process over time, influenced by life events, and both acknowledge its multifactorial structure, socialization, biology, psychology, opportunity, all play a role.
What about research that tries to combine them? Looking at low self-control and social bonds, for instance.
That integrated research is really interesting. It tends to find that, yes, low self-control does predict weaker bonds and more crime, supporting the latent trait idea, but it also strongly confirms the life course view. Positive social bonds formed later in life really do reduce crime, even for people with low self-control.
So later life experiences can override or mitigate earlier predispositions.
It seems so. Social relationships and turning points later in life appear to have an independent effect, which suggests maybe both theories are partly right, perhaps describing different types of offenders or different influences at different life stages.
Which must have big implications for policy and how we try to prevent crime.
Huge. Developmental theories strongly point towards early intervention. If problems start young and build on each other, getting in early offers the best chance to change that trajectory.
And interventions need to be broad, not just focused on one thing.
Absolutely. Targeting young kids preschool, early elementary, to build social skills, coping mechanisms, reduce aggression. Programs need multiple components, involving schools, after-school activities, parents. The goal is boosting protective factors and reducing risks across the board: family, community, school, individual. The Fast Track Project is a good example.
But it's not only about early intervention, right? Sampson and Laub's work highlights adult turning points, too.
Exactly. Their research reminds us that prevention isn't just for kids. Interventions tied to those adult turning points, marriage, job, military moving, can be powerful. They offer structure, support, new opportunities, and a chance for that identity shift, that knifing off the past.
So the big policy message is, crime prevention needs to happen across the lifespan, recognizing early roots but also later chances for change.
That's the key takeaway. It's a shift from just reacting to crime to trying to proactively influence these complex life pathways.
Okay, so pulling this all together from our deep dive today, what's the single most important thing to understand about criminal behavior from this developmental perspective?
I think the main insight is that crime is rarely simple. It's not just one decision or one cause. These theories show us it's usually a dynamic journey, a pathway shaped by this incredibly complex web of factors: personal traits, relationships, opportunities, setbacks unfolding across a person's entire life, from childhood right through adulthood.
And for you listening, why does this matter? Well, understanding these intricate pathways, the risks, and the potential turning points is crucial if we want effective prevention and intervention. It tells us that while early problems can have lasting impacts, real change and transformation are possible at different points along the way.
Consider Gary Sampson's case, mentioned briefly in the sources. His violent life started early, marked by disruptions, abuse, failed relationships. Developmental theories might suggest his path was, tragically, somewhat set by these deep-rooted early issues compounding over time.
Yet, the research on desistance, on people successfully turning away from crime, shows the power of those positive turning points, that cognitive shift, that personal transformation, even for people who've done very serious things. So it leaves us with a really challenging question, doesn't it? If the path is set so early for some, but change is still possible, how do we get better at identifying and effectively intervening along these complex journeys? And maybe even more fundamentally, what societal changes might we need to create more opportunities for everyone to find a different, more positive path?